Good morning, I think. This is my first attempt trying to do a live show on my own. I should have done this, should have practiced this all of last year. Just kind of running on autopilot and reacting. Okay, I think it's working. All right. Hey. So I did kind of like a impromptu little rush show last week. Then I did an interview. I'm going to try to just do one interview a month with Fear and Loathing in the Windy City, the original channel I started with 99 Perspective Studios. Ali Alexandra's taken over. She landed an interview. I had no idea she was going to interview an alderman. That's great. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see how it goes for Mr. Cincho Lopez. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about Chicago stuff, which we'll get to as more Chicago stuff unfolds. Yeah, that's kind of one of the things I wanted to do this, and it's weird. Just gonna meander through a Sunday morning discussion on a lot of different topics, good topics that I'm now being a little bit more disciplined about listening to other podcasts for their analysis, and actually say something back in that regard. Because yeah, InfoWars, narrative wars matter because they can guide people's actions, and people's actions affect change in the material reality. And if we can get enough people working on the same project together, we can improve the material reality for ourselves together. That was the idea, right? So there's a couple of things I kind of wanted to talk about. There was I think a lot more people are, now that we're in the 2020s, moving in, what a decade that can identify itself, juxtaposed with the 2010s, whereas the 2000s were just kind of like this, the O's or whatever they were. I've been fixated on the last 10 years of what the impact of this decade was, because not for nothing, I think that people like their round numbers, like their even numbers, like their special numbers to signify something, and the rich and powerful are no different. Astrology is kind of interesting to me and stuff like that. I take it with curiosity, and maybe I have to decide whether to take it more seriously or just like leave it as like a curiosity. But yeah, rich and powerful people are no different from following and believing anything that human beings are predisposed to believe and feel, because they're alive. So yeah, I don't know. It feels like there's talks of like the great reset, a great rebalance between the global elite. I think that's accurate. There's only so many resources on the planet. There's only so many ideas they have with them. And I don't think they're running to Mars because the world is still full of endless possibilities for them. I think they're running to Mars because there's much less possibilities in the world for them. And that should concern us. Less possibilities for them sure as hell don't mean good things for us. Okay. Occupy Wall Street. There's a lot of organizing that happened out of Occupy Wall Street in New York, of course, in California, in Chicago, in a lot of places, but our major cities especially. And yeah, a lot of the people's platform policy, not just its final form and how you would want to pass it into policy within Congress, but also the logic and undergirding moral foundation for those policies. A lot of it came and was rationalized during the Occupy Wall Street years by those organizers, by those protesters, by those activists, by the people that were paying attention and were concerned, and by the neoliberals that were looking to navigate that energy into something useful for them. One of my biggest regrets and mistakes of last year was I wasn't knocking on enough doors. I should have been knocking on more doors. But there was also no door knocking army. I was not very good at building one. People that had door knocking armies were people that had labor connections, that had institutional connections, that had insight with the party, and that made sense. Elizabeth Warren was a Democrat. Bernie Sanders was not. Illinois is a very tribal state because the Republican Party, while weak, is a very real cultural impact. I would argue that Chicago is where libertarianism, neoliberalism, freshwater politics, if you got money to play, the human commodification game, we don't care where you're from or what you do, what you're about. Just, you can play at the casino. A lot of that, egalitarian, liberal sentimentality, I think, centers around Chicago, at least in the Midwest. And both the Democrats and Republican parties of Illinois have respective, like an insular internal. I mean, that libertarian money power structure is the power structure of Chicago, and they bicker and take their team jersey games seriously to make their lives more interesting. But ultimately, it's just because that's how much power they have in moving different types of people around the country and the world. So that's fun to live under. Can't imagine other places though. I mean, Chicago is our second city, kind of third, fourth now. So like, yeah, I want to be dunking on Chicago a little bit. That's gonna be my thing this year. All right. Insurrection language being weaponized. This is why I really, really focus on the Republican Party enabling Donald Trump trying for a coup on the goddamn country. Because that is not the same thing as what happened in Minneapolis, what happened in Seattle, what's happened in Portland, what's happened in Chicago, what's happened in New York City, time after time after time after time. It's not the same thing. And obviously the left was right, of course. Their instincts are like they're going to weaponize this language against us, of course. But that's why the narrative, points, the words matter. I know words matter, but that's also why, there was a breakdown in words mattering when you made Donald Trump president, you assholes. But call it a coup, because it wasn't it was a concerted effort for a specific outcome for the benefit of one individual to still have power. Because what they're not going to do, what they're not going to do is blame Donald Trump, even though they'd like to. Man, that guy he's a lightning rod. They're not going to blame the Republican Party. They just gave the Republican Party their way. What they're going to do is blame anybody that mobilizes mass groups of people, and not even the big money or institutional organizers. They're probably going to go after the little guys. And that's a problem for the left, of course, because that's where the power of the left comes from. Mass movements, mass mobilization. So insurrection language being weaponized against the masses, of course, is an attack on the left. That's also why the nuanced fights of where the police want to go to continue their unequitable ratio of funding for all other governmental services is also extremely important to me, because because that's how you start abolishing the police. That's how you start changing society. The insurrection language being weaponized is being with the argument of violence. Language is violence. That is a careful conversation to have, I would say, because what we don't want, there was a good point, and this is one thing I want to start by saying, is that progressives in Congress should be. Oh my God, am I on mute? Is that why that thing's blinking? No, I'm not on mute. Okay. Progressives in Congress should be withholding their votes for must-pass bills. I think this was a pretty big letdown on the Fight for 15. You had SEIU International backing the Fight for 15 fight. They endorsed Michael Bloomberg. They're not a union that fights little fight battles for, with a lot of courage. They try to go for guaranteed wins or things that are fundamental to what they're about. So SEIU International was backing Bernie Sanders' efforts to bring the $15 minimum wage into this must-pass bill. And centrist corporatists, Joe Manchin, Joe Biden friends, the Joes, they suck. They blocked the $50 provision. The progressives should have done the same. That was something that was being suggested on leftist podcasts. I think that makes a lot of sense. I know a government shutdown by the left is scary. It is scary if we don't properly plan for it. But what would it look like? The Tea Party shut down the government, and then they worked to exacerbate the pain that they were inflicting on federal employees, and worked to blame the Obama administration trying to give amnesty to illegals for why the federal employees were suffering. It was, on a multiple messaging level, it was also concentrated on the people that run the government not caring enough about the undocumented situation to weigh in more, and to just demand that the government reopen. And that's how they were able to oust Speaker Boner, the other orange guy. Yeah, so what would a government shutdown for the left look like? Well, progressives in Congress have already been using their email list for mutual aid efforts, in New York City and Minneapolis and Detroit, beyond. For Texas. So a government shutdown under from a leftist progressive wing would be mobilizing mutual aid efforts to supplant the welfare governmental services that have to be stopped because of a government shutdown. And that would mean mass mobilization of people, which would mean that insurrection laws working against that would handicap you. It's a preemptive chess move to take away a strong move from the progressives. There should be a government shutdown, I think, this year from the left. I think that's one thing that progressives in Congress can make a concerted effort. It's kind of like a strike. Maybe the government only is shut down for, I don't know, 4 days. How many billions of fucking dollars is that? And in that time, organize to make sure that people that are dependent on unemployment, they're dependent on welfare, that, government's going to make, oh, well, now we got to fucking kick all these people out because, the government shut down, so nothing's protecting them. Go at it, blue boys, some shit like that, motherfuckers. All right, this is not going to be monetized channel, is it? Yeah. You want to organize against that. You want to make sure that they can't terrorize the masses. That's basically the only way that you push back against such powerful institutions that can change reality with the flick of a pen, with a slight posture change, or some insane crisis happens on the other side of the world, and now the government and all these billionaires and institutions are making everybody fixate on that. The Progressive Caucus is, and now that they're being much more disciplined about who is disciplined on their messaging and on the issues that they're attempting to pass, those email lists and those supporters are instrumental, I think, in the leftist ultimate goals, which is why I was hesitant to malign them over not demanding anything out of Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi had run rings around the whole progressive movement since Bernie Sanders got out. And yeah, 2020 was reacting to all that. And it was extremely frustrating. And yeah, there should have been more strategy on what to do. Picking a fight with Pelosi was not the worst thing. I feel that because of the way it shook out now, people that were trying to hold progressives accountable weren't wrong logically. But I do think that now, after the insurrection coup attempt, I think that both the left and the right get gaslit into viewing the power structure as uniformed, and I think that's to the benefit of the power structure. A lot of people that have worked in politics a lot longer, mentioned you can't reform the Democrats from the inside. You can't reform DC from the inside. It's an institution that, works to assimilate any changes within the inside of, where we see that happen in real time. We see, with some understanding or not, that, just that's how that human system is meant to function. However, I do think that, the progressives in Congress, their email list, their supporters, and their international platform is still a fair weather benefit and tool of the international leftist movement. The need that, I can't, I have a very sheltered, insulated life by comparison with so many of the issues that we deal with. An international anti-imperialist movement that is mirrored in the traumas of history that the U.S. has perpetrated maliciously, malevolently. I don't know if internal American leftist praxis could live up to what is being asked and what is needed to change the global dynamics. But I do think that an inside-outside game, and that's a term that's come up for 7-8 years now. The respective players on who's on the inside and who's on the outside and what their roles are. The inside players are only able to legitimize the voices of the outside, and there are breakdowns when they will not do that. And that is part of the process. Of course, I've mentioned a lot on when I used to work with Hardlands Media, but I saw that they were getting YouTubes on them. That sucks. And that's why I don't know if I could do this long time, but best of luck to them. The conservative cultural movement in America was a full court press by the Southern Civil War fallout, the aristocracy of the South, and the pushback against carpetbagging, the breakdown of restoration, and then the narrative, cultural impacts that would lead to Jim Crow and normalizing laws and life like that. That's the conservative cultural movement that's the enmeshment of, propaganda, media, art, plays, music, uh, with the concerted effort to keep America stuck, at least in the sentiments of the slave-holding days. And it's never gone away. It had a big resurgence during the 1920s, as there was, laws against, the alcohol, but there was still lawlessness from the immigrant element, and there was an America First movement. The resurgence of the KKK, especially during the Depression too. There's lead up to like the movie Birth of a Nation. Woodrow Wilson sees it in the White House as it's like a piece of art. Throughout the after World War II, the FBI is trying to make sense of America, create a federal police department in the 50s, and all leads to Nixon's Southern strategy. This is the continuation of that conservative cultural movement. How do you keep the sentiments of the slaveholding days intact for the aristocratic families that are still pissed that they're no longer slaveholders outright? They still own a lot of people. Mercers. All right, let's keep going because I'm just rambling now. So, yeah, I mean, like the mobilization of the masses of people is, if you're a Roman Empire kind of dork, that's why rich and powerful people, cops and weird governmental types, I think, are obsessed with, the Masonic philosophies and rules and theorizings of Roman history. Before the internet, before TV, before radio, before newspapers, like before people were all reading or writing, the same language and shit like that. Before any of that, the Roman Empire organized, quote unquote, millions of fucking people under their empire, right? It's pretty impressive, I guess, and that takes work and that takes discipline, and that's human conditioning and nature as old as time. So yeah, it must be really interesting to people that are into that stuff. But that's kind of why, like, 2,000 years later and so on, like democracy, if you can have it, should matter. Democracy should matter. Democracy should matter because it's people coming together to organize themselves into a fair process within one another, and based on communication, based on shared ideas, based on cooperation. Democracy is based on cooperation, and especially as fraught as the world situation is, I hate to hammer in it. People, like Al Gore can be a bit of a jerk, but he was talking about like an inconvenient truth. People are just like, yeah, none of that stuff happened. No, he said the polar ice caps and the major icebergs were going to start melting irreversibly. That started happening. So like, we're on our way to all that weird stuff, unless these billionaires have something up their sleeves. People can only be as informed as they're engaged, and they're only going to be as engaged as their engagement has an impact. And that's why democracy should be easier to access and universal, and it should matter. So $15 fell apart. $15 minimum wage thing fell apart, though. So that was democracy failing. I think Bernie Sanders even said that if these guys do not accept this $15 minimum wage thing into the reconciliation bill, then we don't really live in a democracy. We live in a republic. We live in an oligarchy. Millions of Americans voted to take away power from the Republicans again in my lifetime, because they suck. And the Democrats are just like, yeah, we suck too, though. Don't, like, why do you guys keep thinking we're here to do anything? So we don't live in a democracy. That's the problem. And you know, we've known it, but now, you know, the Democrats have nowhere to run. You know, it's not Donald Trump that's ruining democracy. It's not the Republican Party that's ruining democracy. It's Joe Biden, it's Joe Manchin, it's the Delaware senators, it's Nancy Pelosi's big moneyed strategies for the Democratic Party, and it's the American history itself of subjugating human beings without care or respect for the humanity. That's what's messing it up. So yeah, like, that's no bueno. But labor politics is really the only place where I feel police reform can happen, which has been my issue with these Teamster groups going up and speaking in favor of police staying in school. Like, yeah, everyone's a parent and everyone should have a voice, and that's great, you know, but labor fights, yeah, they're cultural fights. That's why identity politics and the cultural war also matters, because they impact the labor movement. The labor movement wants the DSA cannon fodder. They don't want to adopt the DSA language. Well, tough, you bastards. You didn't cultivate any other workers. You know, this whole mesh of Boogaloo boys and the populist right and the populist left for the Teamsters to just, like, you know, like, kill Kennedy again. Like, I'm not down with that, you assholes. Like, just let the teachers and the nurses who have been leading the shit just lead. The police don't belong in the AFL-CIO. A fraternity order of police does not belong in the AFL-CIO. If you're going to have security officers work with educators, it should be a separate union. And that internal cultural fight is important, which is why what's been going on in Chicago's, you know, it's important, and LA is kind of next. The police do not want to be removed out of Chicago public schools. It's a lot of money. It's a nice job, and it's also a cultural indicator of the justification of the history of what they have done onto society as necessary. We should go the other way. We should go the other way, in my opinion. They should be out of schools. This is how I feel. And that's where identity politics and cultural war analysis needs to find a home in. How do we use that language that liberals use to weaponize and divide class, to realign it into class solidarity? Military, police, and the industries that kill our planet, like the fossil fuel industries, are intertwined into the process of capitalism that sends resources upward and suppresses masses from rising up against those dynamics. It stands to reason that at the core of their mission is an antagonistic approach to our efforts. And so we need to operate with that in mind, that what we really need to do is change the mission statement of the US military, of local law enforcement, region by region, major municipality by major municipality, and ultimately get them to agree to stop guarding fossil fuel industry capitalism at all costs. And whatever the hell happens to culture and society because of that happens, because fuck it. So, and that's, you know, why Donald Trump, in my opinion, was so dangerous. His nationalistic push, his stupid nationalistic push, like he did not make it nuanced. He wasn't, you know, pontificating like poetry. He wasn't, he's not a man of letters, you know. But his breakdown of language in order to push just stupid nationalism. You know, people were fighting against globalism, but internationalism, solidarity with workers across all countries, was also challenged there. Donald Trump and that America First movement is meant to isolate the American worker from other workers internationally. And then that's why they're not fighting for $15 minimum wage. That's why they're not fighting for a living wage. The America First movement is not there to save the American worker. It's there to kill enough of other workers so that people that are in that crowd feel like they will be taken care of. It's the oldest, stupidest game in America and anywhere, but it sucks. So cultural and identity politics matters for not just class solidarity, but also working towards an anti-imperialist internationalist movement that has a feedback loop into each other. It can ebb and flow as it needs to, but it should maintain ties to ebb and flow into each other's commentary and praxis. Which brings to the Working Families Party. Like, what's going on there, man? You know, they flipped Georgia. That was crazy, amazing. They've been very instrumental in trying to unite, basically doing the work of our revolution. Because, you know, our revolution was just like a lot of male-driven labor groups that were just like, oh, Bernie's useful. And then, you know, they didn't. Well, never mind. I only know Illinois. Working Families Party is formidable, and I know that people are upset right now with the. I should be doing more research on HR1 for the try to make elections better, but then seems like it's freezing out third parties. The Working Families Party's power comes directly from the Democratic Party. It's a Democratic voter that knows that Michael Bloomberg is not their friend, that corporate Democrats will be working against their interests, and that do want to have that civility politics plays a factor, but so does the cultural war, so do identity politics, and ultimately comes back to a sense of safety. It's not outright a leftist group. It actually could be deemed as a bit of a conservative group if it's really just focused on persevering middle class, working class families. However, it's a formidable group because it does the work of the Democratic Party for them. And those email lists, those institutional connections, those relationships, that's where the real breakaway from the Democratic Party would come from, in my opinion. A leftist movement from the Green Party, a leftist populist movement from the Movement for People's Party, definitely would organize people into messaging discipline and hopefully action, but guaranteed people that vote and are concerned about their self-interest and are upset about what they have lived through in America, that have placed their trust in a group like the Working Class Party. If that group is making an argument that it's time for them to break away from the Democratic Party by this decade, if they don't change, you know, their tune, which they won't, so they should just do it. That'd be formidable. Crazy pie in the sky idea, but I imagine they're not going to want to miss out on Nina Turner's efforts in Ohio. I think Nina Turner has been a very strong and disciplined voice for the movement, has been pushed out of the Biden administration, first of all. Like, that was already, like, that was messed up, Joe. Why you got to do that? Why you got to be that jerk? But, like, so she has that credibility in the sense that she'll work in the Democratic Party, and she seems much more institutional than people on the left will want her to. But we know that she's outspoken and unapologetic about what she's saying, to the point where the Biden administration specifically wanted her away. CNN threw a bunch of donuts at her efforts to try to bring them into the leftist conversation. So I think that 2022 as a lightning rod for our efforts, you know, God bless Nina Turner and what she's trying to do. I think that she could really take away the messaging from where corporate Democrats will want it to be, And that might be enough to mess up their games, because whether they win or lose against Republicans, we know they're not going to be helping us. So got to work those other dynamics. But if Nina were to win under a leftist coalition in 2022, with nothing else really changing, kind of seems like where we're going. I think that the left would be in a good place to run their own candidate in 2024. To, at the very least, pull another Bernie of keeping the country somewhat left and not fall into the nationalism, the stupid nationalism of the Trump movement, of the QAnon movement, of the America First movement. Which brings me to Nancy Pelosi. She sucks. She knew exactly what she was doing when brand new Congress Justice Democrats started. The small dollar donation model, which was modeled after Bernie Sanders's presidential run, it gave all those candidates a ton of legitimacy. It gave all their voices extra strength, and it turned a lot of heads all over the world to see how this would shake out. And Nancy Pelosi worked overtime to destroy it within her party, within her ranks, and target those candidates as outsiders, as infiltrators, as agitators, as a problem, because they didn't take her big money donors and they wouldn't play along as easily. And we know that even doing that has not given progressives all the free mobility that we would want them to, or the confidence to act as forthright as people would want them to. Now I'm very upset that the QAnon movement, the Marjorie Greene, what's her face, Taylor movement thing, they're adopting the small dollar donation model because the Democrats are letting them do it, because they rather a unhinged, vitriolic element of the country be given that model in order to diminish the importance and impact implications of what it means to run without corporate PAC money, thus diminishing the standing of the entire squad and their election efforts and the whole Bernie Sanders movement of the 2010s. Like, Nancy Pelosi's working overtime to throw you in the toilet. AOC, Rashida, Ilhan, Jayapal. She's working overtime for it. She wants to flush you down with the America First movement. You guys are the same, at least to her corporate donors, at least the international corporate donors that she has small private fundraisers with. They don't, like, yeah. So that sucks, yeah, that sucks. That's how terrible of a person Pelosi is to humanity. Like, she does not believe in the masses' ability to govern themselves. When she says we feed you, I mean, like, what a jerk. Like, is that she's talking about the migrant farmers that have been abused and working in terrible conditions in California since, like, before Reagan, and always, demanding a little bit more dignity in their lives. When she says we feed you, like, oh my God. Oh my God. So that's awful. So last thing, man, this is just like boring, meandering kind of thing, but why the cultural war matters, why language matters, why identity politics matters, why the policing in schools matters. Whatever the labor movement is ultimately embroiled in, whatever it is that they believe is right or wrong, or this or that, it's going to matter for who gets criminalized and who doesn't. Language matters for who's going to get targeted for punitive, measures, and and who's going to be enabled. That's why we have a strong populist right-wing movement in America and a fraught leftist movement. So, Lori Lightfoot was talking about bullies and aldermanic offices. I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's also a lot of bullying in mayoral offices. Glad, let's hear the truth about what's happening in Chicago. That's fine. Let's hear the truth. But let's also remember what we're here to do. Quan McDonald was killed over on Pulaski right before you get on the 55 in front of that Burger King. Because he was stealing from trucks, the Teamster trucks that are parked by the side of the road there. He was opening the back of the locks with a knife, because that's what you would use to open a lock. Who told him those Teamster trucks were there, that you could get stuff that you can sell later, and then bring it here so that you can sell it. And then the cops weren't interested in figuring any of that shit out. No, they just shot him. One cop shot him 17 times. 6 times. Jason Van Dyke shot him. And it was a real pain in the ass, but like, organizers in Chicago protested, agitated, and got him fired and arrested and convicted. And it was a whole thing, the whole justice process that they use as an excuse for criminalizing the youth and why it's okay to kill them outright, now was institutionally challenged in Chicago. The cops have never gotten over it here. Getting cops out of schools based on that situation has been something that has been close to being a real opportunity in Chicago. That I don't feel this mayor is, as supportive as, she ran an elected school board and she's already taken that back. I don't know. Ultimately the fate of Chicago or these movements or anything, but I know that that's one of the things that got me involved in Chicago politics, was that we were at this juncture of a huge cultural shift. And there's a lot of trauma in Chicago. A lot of the people that are working this issue have gone through a lot of shit because of the city, because of these institutions, because of the history of this city. And it's hard, grueling, often unrewarding work. It's also work that, as part of Chicago's legacy here, it's not any one person's work. The people that received Martin Luther King in Chicago and held a rally for him as Nazis were marching around demanding all kinds of insane things, had an impact on what the city is having just as much as organizers today. And some of them are still around. And our different sides of the issues. It's a complicated place, but the material reality change that we wanted in Chicago was a less militarized police, was throwing less money at law enforcement, having an unequitable budget for the criminalization of the people of Chicago, and not the development of communities in Chicago. And a lot of people are going to posture that they did this and they did that. I think we know that you look around the city and we need more. So no one has really done it all. Um, Everybody does a little something. What the mayor's little something could do is actually support an elected school board and a different elected police board. Be the champion of the city that she said she was going to be. Um, but I don't think that's where we're heading. So I'll try to make these more interesting, and still playing around with editing software so that it's not just me talking at you and, my notes are. Oh, last thing. How do you hold leadership accountable within the movement? In a recent interview, Kshama Sawant had mentioned the censure by Chicago DSA on Andre Vasquez. That is a precedent of like, hey, you were a member of DSA. We worked hard to elect you. You fight for DSA issues. We didn't like that shit, bro. We didn't like what you did over there. That was a moment, and public statements, are moments within groups. Accountabilities within groups are important. Honestly, I think it's about, is your narrative about your movement work honest? Are you in a marketing push, or are you here to empower people? And accountability comes with not letting people just market themselves for their own benefit. I've often been accused of that. I don't know how much any of this has benefited me. I'm just trying to say things into the wind. But accountability within the movement is desperately needed at many different levels. Accountability within society is desperately needed. Michael Cuomo, we see what's happening with Governor Cuomo. Hopefully gets rightfully canceled for the culture that he's cultivated in Albany, for the criminal behavior that he seemed to be embroiled in regards to hiding death reports during COVID. And just for his, neoliberal agenda in New York of not letting Amazon workers, Whole Food workers unionize, not legalizing cannabis, despite having pressure to do so, not raising taxes on the rich. That was things that I think New Yorkers, they prioritized the last part, and they let them get away with the first two parts. Hopefully no more. And there can be accountability there. There should definitely be accountability at all levels of the leftist movement. So we'll see if there's more of that. Thank you guys, all two people. I think I'm one of them. All right. Thank you.